Do it now while she can't check. That was the text my mother sent my father while I was unconscious on an operating table. I was 21, under anesthesia for spinal surgery, completely unable to move, speak, or even know what was happening. And while surgeons were working on my back, my parents were sitting in the hospital cafeteria watching the clock. Dad opened the college account he'd still had access to since I was a minor. $31,000. Almost everything Grandma Evelyn had helped save for my education. Gone. He transferred it into a joint account belonging to my mother and my older sister, Vanessa. Vanessa needs it now, Mom told him. Tera will probably miss a semester after surgery anyway. They thought they had chosen the perfect moment. But while I was still unconscious, my phone lit up in recovery. Nurse Rachel Kim glanced at the lock screen. Transfer COMPLTD, $31,000. Then another notification appeared. A message from Mom. Rachel couldn't unlock my phone or investigate my finances, but she could see enough of the preview to know something was wrong. By the time I began opening my eyes, everything felt distant. My throat was dry, my back burned beneath the medication, and Rachel was standing beside me. Tera, I need to ask you something. I blinked slowly. Does anyone else have permission to move large amounts of money from your accounts? My parents, I whispered. The old college account. Rachel hesitated. Would they move $31,000 without asking you? Even through the medication, the number cut through the fog. No. My voice cracked. They wouldn't. Rachel's expression changed. She stepped into the hallway. I heard only fragments. Emergency contact information. Yes, Evelyn Bennett. I tried lifting my head. Where are my parents? Nobody answered immediately. That frightened me more than the pain. A few minutes later, I woke more fully and noticed a man standing near the window. Dark suit, leather folder in one hand. For one desperate second, I assumed he worked for the bank. Maybe Rachel had somehow stopped the transfer. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Then I looked toward the door. Mom and Dad still weren't there. The stranger walked toward my bed. Ms. Bennett. I swallowed. Yes. He pulled a chair closer but didn't sit. My name is Daniel Mercer. Rachel stood quietly behind him. Daniel opened the leather folder. I'm from the law firm your grandmother told this hospital to contact if your parents ever touched that account. My heart seemed to stop. Grandma Evelyn had been dead for 2 years. And somehow, before she died, she had known exactly what my parents might do. I stared at Daniel, trying to decide whether the anesthesia was making me misunderstand him. My grandmother. Yes. She died 2 years ago. I know. I tried to push myself higher, but pain shot through my back. Rachel immediately adjusted the bed. Daniel closed the folder. You just came out of major surgery, Tera. I'm not going to explain everything while you're medicated, but I need you to do one thing. What? Do not approve, confirm, or verbally authorize anything involving that $31,000. Not for your parents, not for your sister, not for anyone. Before I could ask why, the door opened. Mom and Dad walked in. Mom stopped the instant she saw Daniel. Who is this? Dad barely looked at me before asking, Tera, have you checked your banking app yet? That question told me more than I wanted to know. I looked directly at him. Where's my college money? Mom folded her arms. We moved it. My stomach tightened. You what? Richard still has access to the account, she said quickly. We didn't do anything illegal. Where did you move it? Dad exhaled impatiently. Into the account Vanessa shares with your mother. I stared at them. That money is for college. And Vanessa has expenses too, Mom replied. Her graduate school deposit is due, and she needs help with living costs. So you gave her my money. Family money, Mom corrected. I looked toward Daniel. He said nothing. Mom continued, "You just had spinal surgery. You'll probably postpone a semester anyway. Vanessa needs the money now." My hands tightened around the hospital blanket. "Why didn't you ask me?" Neither answered. I looked at Dad. "Why did you wait until I was unconscious?" Mom glanced away. Dad finally said, "Because if we'd asked you first, you would have made it difficult." There it was. Not an accident. Not an emergency. They had waited until anesthesia removed my ability to say no. Daniel remained silent, letting their words hang in the room. Mom suddenly pointed toward him. "This is a private family matter. Tell him to leave." For years, I would have obeyed just to stop an argument. This time I looked at Daniel. "Stay." Mom's face hardened. And as I looked at the leather folder in his hands, one question became impossible to ignore. If Grandma had been dead for 2 years, how had she known I might someday need an attorney protecting that exact $31,000? The next afternoon, I was stable enough to leave my room for a short meeting. Rachel helped me into a wheelchair and took me to a hospital family consultation room. Daniel was already there with a hospital social worker. Then the door opened. Mom entered first. Dad followed. And behind them was Vanessa. She wouldn't look at me. Finally, I said, "You knew." Vanessa's head snapped up. "I didn't steal anything, Tera. $31,000 landed in an account with your name on it. Mom and Dad told me the money was available." Mom immediately interrupted. "Because it was." Daniel leaned back without speaking. Mom looked around the room as though she were presenting her case to a jury. That account contained family money. Tera never had exclusive control over it. Richard was authorized to access it, and the timing had nothing to do with her surgery. I stared at her. Yesterday, she had barely tried to justify it. Now she had a prepared version. Daniel finally spoke. "Mrs. Bennett, if the timing was coincidental, why did you text your husband? Do it now while she can't check." The room went silent. Vanessa slowly turned toward Mom. "You said you transferred it before the surgery." Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Rachel explained that the notification had appeared on my lock screen during recovery, preserving the timing. The bank records independently showed when the transfer was completed. Vanessa pushed her chair backward. "You lied to me." Dad leaned forward. "That doesn't change the fact that I had access." "No," Daniel said calmly, "but there's another fact you should know." He opened his folder and removed several records. "Most of that $31,000 didn't come from either of you." He slid the documents across the table. "It came from Evelyn Bennett, my grandmother. Deposit after deposit. Year after year. Money designated toward my education." Dad glanced at the papers. I was still authorized on the account. Daniel didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, he turned to Vanessa. "Until ownership and the underlying agreement are resolved, I strongly advise you not to spend any of those funds. Doing so could involve you personally in a much larger financial dispute." Vanessa immediately looked at Mom. "I'm not touching that money." "Vanessa." "No." For the first time, Mom looked genuinely cornered. Then Daniel reached into the back of his folder. He removed a sealed envelope and placed it on the table in front of me. I recognized the handwriting before he said anything. "Grandma." Across the front were 11 words. "For Tera, if Diane or Richard ever take the education money." My hand moved toward Grandma's envelope. Daniel gently stopped me. "That letter is yours, Tera. Read it privately. But there are documents everyone in this room needs to see first." He opened the legal file. Dad shifted in his chair. "What documents?" Daniel pulled out the contribution records we had already seen. followed by another set of papers. Evelyn knew Richard remained listed on the account because Tera was a minor when it was established. Dad crossed his arms. Exactly, so I had authority. You had access, Daniel corrected. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. Mom's expression changed. Daniel continued. Evelyn became concerned after learning the two of you had discussed using Tera's education savings if Vanessa needed financial help. Vanessa stared at our parents. You discussed this before. Mom looked down. That was answer enough. Daniel tapped the documents. When Evelyn made her final large contribution, she had an agreement prepared regarding how those funds were to be used. Dad reached for the paperwork. Daniel slid it toward him. The relevant consequence is simple. If Evelyn's education funds were diverted for someone else's benefit, I was authorized to demand that the money be restored and, if necessary, pursue recovery through civil proceedings. Dad's confidence disappeared as he read. Mom leaned over his shoulder. Richard. He didn't answer. Vanessa stood so quickly her chair scraped backward. My name is on the account you sent it to. Yes, Daniel said. Vanessa turned on Mom. Reverse it. Sit down. No, you told me this was money you could give me. You didn't tell me Grandma had protected it. Mom looked at me. Tera, are you really going to let some lawyer turn this into a legal war? I almost laughed, but my incision hurt too much. You transferred my college fund while I was unconscious. We're your family. And your family decision happened when I physically couldn't object. Daniel gathered the papers. I've already sent formal notice to Diane, Richard, and the receiving account holder. Mom went pale. Yesterday, I had been lying in a hospital bed asking where my money had gone. Now they were the ones being told what happened next. Before anyone could speak again, Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. The bank's fraud and legal department. Nobody moved. Daniel answered. Daniel Mercer. He listened. Dad's fingers tightened around the agreement. Daniel's eyes lifted toward my parents. Then he said, Yes, I have the agreement right here. Daniel ended the call and placed his phone beside the legal file. Then he finally explained what Grandma had done. Years earlier, Evelyn had overheard my parents discussing my college savings as though it were backup money for Vanessa. If Vanessa ever needs help, Mom had said, we can always move some of Tera's education money. Grandma never forgot it. Because the account had originally been created while I was a minor, Dad remained listed with transactional access. Rather than pretend that access didn't exist, Grandma documented exactly where her contributions came from and what they were intended for. Before making her final large contribution, she had Mom and Dad sign an agreement acknowledging that her money was being held specifically for my education. And there was a consequence. If they diverted those funds for somebody else's benefit, they were required to restore them. Daniel had been authorized to enforce that agreement. Dad stared at his own signature. Mom whispered, I remember signing this. Daniel nodded. Mrs. Bennett, your mother made sure you would. Grandma had also arranged for Daniel's office to appear among the contacts connected with my medical and emergency paperwork once I became an adult. That was how Rachel's concern had reached him so quickly. Rachel hadn't somehow reversed the transfer herself. She had simply seen enough on my lock screen to realize that a vulnerable patient might need help before the money could be moved again or spent. Now there was a complete trail. The transfer timestamp. Mom's text. Grandma's contribution records. The signed agreement. And my parents' own admissions in that hospital. There was nothing left for them to explain away. Later, when everyone had gone, I finally opened Grandma's envelope. Her handwriting shook slightly across the page. She wrote that protecting someone sometimes meant preparing for the day when people they loved chose convenience over what was right. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried. Not because I had won anything. Because Grandma had known. She had understood exactly how powerless I might become, and she had protected me from a moment she would never live to see. Mom returned later. She stood near the foot of my bed. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I was trying to give both my daughters an equal chance." I looked at her. Then, why did equality require waiting until I was unconscious? She had no answer. Vanessa did. "I'm not taking her money." Mom turned. "Vanessa, no, you used me to justify something you'd already decided to do." Faced with Daniel's formal demand and the documentation behind it, my parents had a choice: restore the full amount or let the dispute move toward civil proceedings. They restored it. Every dollar. $31,000. The money was placed into a new education account controlled solely by me. Dad's access disappeared. Mom disappeared too. But I didn't stop there. I removed them from every financial permission they still had and changed my emergency contact. When Mom realized what I was doing, she said, "We're still your parents." "I know." "Then, when are you going to let us help with your recovery?" I looked at the two people who had waited until surgeons put me under anesthesia before taking my money. "When I decide, I can trust you again." For once, that decision belonged entirely to me. Vanessa removed herself from the joint account. Our relationship didn't magically repair itself, but over time we started talking again, carefully. My relationship with my parents changed permanently. Contact became limited. They no longer received automatic access to my finances, my medical decisions, or my future simply because they were family. Months later, after rehabilitation, I returned to college. The restored money paid for exactly what Grandma had intended it to pay for: my education. I kept her letter with my most important documents. Sometimes I still thought about the strangest part of that day. I had entered surgery, believing my parents were sitting somewhere in that hospital, worried about whether I would wake up safely. Instead, they were waiting for the moment when I couldn't stop them. But Grandma had understood something I hadn't yet learned. Access wasn't ownership. Authority wasn't trust. And being family didn't give anyone the right to decide my future while I was powerless. My parents waited until I was unconscious to take control of my future, but Grandma had made sure that when I woke up, it would still belong to me.